morning. This is the Subcommittee on Europe, Eurasia, and Emerging Threats, and we are now in session. And I would first and foremost like to ask my colleagues to, with unanimous consent, that Mr. Blumenauer, who has spent such considerable time and effort on this issue of water and the importance of it in world affairs today and in the standard of living of our people, that he be permitted to participate on the same status as any other member of the committee. Hearing no objections, so ordered. And it is the chair's intention to have a short opening statement. The ranking member will have an opening statement, and I will give also time to Mr. Blumenauer as well as our other members for short opening statements. So good morning. The subcommittee has convened, and we welcome our witnesses today as part of our emerging threats, which is that's within the title in our portfolio. We examine the topic of water as a strategic resource and its potential use as a threat. Those of us who have lived around water our whole lives may be unaware of how water may be manipulated maliciously for both material gain and for political coercion. Although in our country's history, I think it's very clear that there were water wars and people in conflict and people and great accomplishments of people working together. That's our country's history is filled with that, focusing on the issue of water. Our witnesses today make clear such conduct is routine when it comes to countries like Communist China. That routine conduct is manipulation of water for a power's sake. As our witness today, Gordon Chang, will explain that China's illegal occupation of Tibet puts it in control of the roof of the world, and thus the headwaters that service half the world's population. We could be confident that resulting water disputes could be handled responsibly and reasonably, perhaps solved in international forums or in agreements like many other countries do. If, that is, we could be confident in that if China were a country that wasn't the world's worst human rights abuser, that has had no political reform whatsoever in these last 20 years when we've seen such incredible reform in other and former communist countries. Our Congressional Research Service testimony makes clear that most of these matters in terms of water are resolved through negotiations and peaceably, and I might say remarkably, they these issues are solved by people acting responsibly and providing leadership and reaching out to people and to find solutions. Some of the 300 agreements over the last 70 years have unfolded in that way. Today, a warning alarm is sounding about China's control of such water resources, because we have seen that China, even in the last few months, is not so reasonable when it's making its territorial claims. China isn't the only flashpoint for the water issue, however, and water controversies are nothing new. Water is a volatile issue in the Middle East today, for example, and but let's take a look. If you read the history, water played a very significant role in, for example, creating the environment that led to the Six-Day War back in 1967. Basically, that conflict began when the Syrian government decided to dam up waters that were flowing into Israel, followed by an Israeli air attack, which destroyed those dams. Then Egypt and other Arab neighbors were called into the conflict, and it almost led to a superpower confrontation, which would have been a disaster for the whole planet. And that all began with what? A water controversy over how much water was going to be flowing into Israel, and the attempt by Syria to dam up that water. Today, there are heartening signs, however, of cooperation in that same region between otherwise adversarial parties. The Red Sea to Dead Sea Canal project is one that has potential of supplying water to Jordan, a country suffering from extreme water scarcity. Last month, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority signed an agreement setting the path for a Red to Dead Canal that would allow a desalinization plant in Aqaba, Jordan. Israel agreed to increase its fresh water that it sends to Jordan from the Sea of Galilee, and the Palestinians will be able to buy cheaper water from Israel. It seems like a very good deal all the way around, but let me note it took a long time and a lot of serious negotiations and a lot of sincerity on both sides, all three sides of that negotiating table, to reach that agreement. And let me just note, one of the first assignments, many people know that I was a speechwriter for President Reagan, and my first assignment was to welcome and to work with the president on his welcoming remarks for President Hussein, King Hussein of Jordan. And King Hussein of Jordan was the first visit to the Reagan White House, the first official visit. And I was supposed to work with the president on welcoming remarks, and that was the first remarks that I have ever written for a president of the United States, I might add, or anybody else. And the State Department sent me over a stack of things to look at like that, and their sample of what they would want the president to say, which I, of course, discarded immediately, and studied, but I studied everything that was in front of me, and there was one piece of paper in that big stack of papers of things to look at that jumped out at me, and it was that there were negotiations going on about the Red Sea to Dead Sea project that had just started at that time, which was 1981. And so I looked at this and I said, you know, this is really a significant thing that we have people who are politically so separated, who are willing to sit down at a table because of how important water is and work together to try to find a solution. Perhaps we can use this as an example of the type of cooperation we should encourage. And so I decided I was going to write that into the president's speech myself. And I had no idea that was hired on, when I was hired on as a speechwriter, that I would have this type of personal contact with the President of the United States. And it finally dawned on me when they said, well, sure, if you got a good idea, put it in there and we'll see what the president says. And of course, he liked it very much, and it was part of his welcoming remarks. But at that point, I really found out I had a pretty good job after all. Well, we could take a look at what's happened, however. It has taken all of these years to come to an agreement. And I will say this, we should all encourage this process between Jordan, the Palestinians, and the Israelis, because that might take long, but it is symbolic, as Ronald Reagan noted in his welcoming remarks to King Hussein. It is very symbolic of what can be accomplished by people, even when they have other disagreements of how they can work together. The situation involving the basin countries in the Nile River, for example, deserves watching. And we need to look at this very closely, because the Nile, of course, flows through 10 different countries, and Egypt is one of the final ones. And basically, Egypt views the Nile as its primary national security and economic lifeline. So with so many countries upstream, that's an area we've got to look at and try to work with these powers to make sure that they are, again, are efforts made for cooperation rather than confrontation. This subcommittee held a hearing on July of last year on the dam controversy between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, and that was a controversy that is now at the high-level international conference of water cooperation, which opened up in August. The Uzbeks are arguing that the proposed Rogan Dam in Tajikistan would cost them some $600 million a year. Since this issue has not been resolved, we will continue to monitor it closely, but that shows you again how significant just an idea of how we're going to control the flow of water can be. $600 million to Uzbekistan means that I would imagine it has more, whether their kids are going to get educated, whether they're going to have a proper health care system in that country is being challenged by the fact that water is being controlled. One positive story deals with our border relations with Mexico. The United States and Mexico in 1944 signed a water treaty that has allowed us to resolve most of our border water issues relative to the Rio Grande and Colorado River. And let me note for the record that I have been from California. I have studied not studied as much as some of our witnesses have, I'm sure, the history of water between California and the other border states and Mexico. And I think we have played pretty hardball with the Mexicans on this. And I think there have been very legitimate complaints on the part of Mexico in the past that the United States was not operating with them with the same type of sincerity and the same type of respect that we should have been doing to a country that is our neighbor that we wanted to maintain a peaceful relationship with. And the 1944 agreement has gone a long way to try to clear up some of those problems that were around for a long time, and we still have some issues of water that we need to work out with Mexico. Water is a significant issue and a potential geopolitical threat to much of the world. Our witnesses are in a distinguished group of witnesses today. Jeremy Sharp is a specialist in Middle East affairs with the Congressional Research Service. Gordon Chang is an author and a lawyer who lived in China for many years and has traveled regularly there since. David Goodtree at the Symposium for Water and Innovation from Massachusetts is certainly our guest of our ranking member, but we're looking forward to his testimony. And like most Americans, I have a great admiration for our witnesses' father. And Maura Moynihan's dad was, of course, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and who my generation of Americans looked up to tremendously. And he sometimes gave the Reagan White House a few fits, and I remember those as well. But he was always respected, his opinions was always respected, and he had a major influence on political thinking in the United States. And he was, of course, in my way of thinking, he was a heroic champion of human rights at the United Nations, and as well as an ambassador to India. And Ms. Moynihan, of course, was with him in India and has done a great deal of work on her own in terms of the issue of Tibet and China, and we're very happy to have her today to share her understanding of maybe the threat that we face with China still occupying Tibet after 60 years. So I would, again, with unanimous consent, I put the rest of the insert into the record a bio of all of our witnesses. So ordered without hearing an objection. And I turn to Mr. Keating for his opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this timely and important hearing. I'm also pleased that Mr. Blumenauer is able to join us today. Mr. Blumenauer and our fellow subcommittee member, Mr. Poe, have done an awful lot of work together on global water security, both in terms of increasing access to clean water and in promoting mitigation of conflicts stemming from water scarcity. I'd also like to join the Chairman in thanking our witnesses who are appearing today, particularly Mr. David Goodtree. It's a pleasure to see him, almost as great a pleasure to see the cap that he has brought with him and placed on the desk of the Boston Red Sox. For those of you on the panel in the room, that is the world champion Boston Red Sox, and thank you for that thoughtfulness as well. Mr. Goodtree is the co-chair and founder of the Symposium on Water Innovation in my home state of Massachusetts, an association of water technology industry executives focused on bringing clean, abundant water to global markets through technology created in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Mr. Chairman, it's clearly in the U.S. interest to work and reduce tensions caused by water scarcity and promote access to clean water around the entire world. In 2011, the National Intelligence Estimate, the U.S. intelligence community reported that over the next 10 years, many countries important to the United States will experience water shortages, poor water quality, floods, and other water problems that will risk instability and even state failure. It will also increase tensions between neighbors and distract partners from working with the United States on important policy objectives. While disagreements over water are inevitable, the good news is that the international community has an impressive track record of resolving water tensions through negotiation and cooperation. In the last 70 years, there have been 37 reported incidents of water conflicts involving violence. During that same period, roughly 300 international water agreements were negotiated and signed. Indeed, recent history shows that the peaceful resolution of water disputes can be a useful diplomatic tool for building trust and cooperation. Looking forward, the key will be to find ways to promote cooperation between countries in cases where water is or has the potential to become a source of tension. Admittedly, this is not easy. Most countries view water as a sovereign issue, and there are many cases where outside intervention is not warranted at all. Moreover, water problems are often connected to a broader set of political, developmental, and financial challenges. In the future, international efforts to increase access to clean water and promote sanitation will be just as important. According to the State Department, nearly 800 million people around the world do not have access to clean water. More than 1.5 billion still lack access to improved sanitation facilities. Each year, more than 4 billion cases of diarrhea cause 2.2 million deaths. Most are in children under the age of 5. In addition to the lives lost, the total economic losses associated with inadequate clean water supply and sanitation is estimated at more than $250 billion annually. The scarcity of clean water and sanitation disproportionately affects women and children. In many countries, women and young girls bear responsibility for meeting the water needs of the entire family. Collecting water can consume up to 5 hours a day, time that could be spent in school or improving their families' livelihoods. Addressing water problems is a daunting challenge, but the international community's successful track record and the growth of new and innovative technologies give us even greater reason to hope. As such, I'm interested in hearing our witnesses' views on the effectiveness of U.S. diplomatic and developmental efforts to promote dialogue, capacity building, and the development and use of new water technologies. I would also welcome our witnesses' view on the role that regional initiatives could play in promoting cooperation, thereby reducing water-related tensions. One example is the new Silk Road initiative, which aims to improve energy and trade linkages between countries in Central and South Asia. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back and again, thank all of you for being here.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Marino, would you, Colonel Cook? And I would welcome remarks from Mr. Blumenauer, and again, appreciate the leadership that he is showing on this issue, and uniting both Republicans and Democrats, trying to get us focused on this issue. And your leadership, I think, has inspired me and the ranking member to call this hearing today. So thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I deeply appreciate the courtesy of the subcommittee for being able to join you. I guess it's obligatory in a water hearing at some point somebody has to quote Mark Twain that whiskey was for drinking and water is for fighting. And your willingness to focus on water as an area of conflict, threat to the United States and others is deeply appreciated. As I appreciate the support that you and the ranking member have given to the latest legislation that Judge Poe and I have introduced, the Water for the World Act, which, if enacted, would help in some way address some of these issues. It is too often a hidden issue in foreign policy, and the detail that you went through, both of you went through a moment ago, I think is very important, and I wish somehow that it got more attention here in Congress. And this subcommittee meeting is moving in the right direction. The threats go beyond the shared river basin. As my friend, the ranking member, pointed out, in terms of the instability and threat by the staggering number of people that still, despite intense efforts over the last 20 years, almost 1 billion without safe drinking water, more than 2 billion without access to sanitation, and the ripple effects that that can have. And I think it is so important to focus on the impact of families in these areas. And I do appreciate Mr. Keating's talking about the fact that this is primarily a burden that falls on women and girls in families. There will today, because of that up to 5 hours spent, globally, 200 million hours will be spent by women and girls gathering water and putting, by the way, often themselves at risk as they go from the village. The spotlight on China, I think, is so important and is welcome, as well as I didn't realize the long history of this red to dead, but it is an example of where these can be positive. What we're seeing in Syria today, the experts tell us, is in no small measure a result of a sustained drought that drove almost 1 million farmers to migrate to urban areas, hungry, jobless, and was a flashpoint for that initial protest against the regime, as Assad had no interest or ability to deal with it. Over the next 20 years, we're going to see more urban instability due to population increase, disease, poverty, and social unrest. We have been working with the United States and international partners making some progress, but we risk reversing that progress that we've made due to the explosive population growth that's going to occur in sprawling urban slums where it's difficult and expensive to provide sanitation, quickly leading to pollution and disease. It was exciting yesterday to see our friends in the Appropriations Committee in a difficult budget climate responding to the challenge that a member of us have been working on with a 20% increase to give leverage to the State Department. And I hope that the hearing will help spotlight what we might be able to do with the passage of the Paul Simon Water for the World Act, which is also moving its way through the Senate. Elevate the existing position in the State Department to better coordinate diplomatic policy, develop a coherent policy framework that will drive our policy in the right direction, build the capacity within the State Department to handle both the Bureau and mission level issues, and make sure that water, sanitation, and hygiene is reflected in broader development and strategic planning documents. The leadership of this subcommittee is deeply appreciated. It's timely, and it's an opportunity for us to take an important step to encourage some of the related committees, Appropriations defense authorization, as well as foreign affairs, to refine our policies and protect our progress. As you pointed out in your opening statement, Mr. Chairman, it's not only a threat, but it's potentially a solution, and I look forward to this discussion. Thank you very much.
I appreciate that opening statement, and also appreciate the mentioning Senator Paul Simon, who worked so hard when Mr. Moynihan was known for his work on human rights, but Mr. Simon was a person who saw the water issue as so significant. And I remember when I was a young freshman, a long time ago, I got a call from Paul Simon when I mentioned that I thought water was an important issue, and he took time to call me up and talk to me on the phone about how he thought that I had some insights that would be useful and be very important to follow up on those insights. So,
Begging your leave, Mr. Chairman?
yes.
And both those gentlemen were charter members of the Senate Bow Tie Caucus.
All right. With that, I would ask the witnesses if they could condense their testimony to about 5 minutes, and then we will ask questions. We will have a panel of dialogue and some questions afterwards. Mr. Sharp, you may proceed.
Chairman Rohrabacher, Ranking Member Keating, and other distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting CRS here today. I will provide an overview of the so-called Red Dead Canal and its potential implications for U.S. policy. To the surprise of many outside observers, just over a month ago at the World Bank headquarters here in Washington, Israel, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority signed a trilateral Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU. This MOU outlines a series of water-sharing agreements, which includes the initial phase construction of what has been informally referred to as the Red Dead Canal. The Red Dead Canal is a decades-old plan to provide fresh water to water-scarce countries in the surrounding area, while simultaneously restoring the Dead Sea, which has been shrinking at an alarming rate. The original Red Dead concept was to pump water from the Red Sea and desalinate it for use by the participating countries. The leftover brine would then be gradually channeled to the Dead Sea, helping restore the sea's receding water levels. Regional environmentalists have long criticized plans to restore the Dead Sea using Red Sea water. They warn that the transfusion of water from the Red Sea into the Dead Sea could have serious ecological consequences that would negatively impact both Dead Sea tourism and industry. In 2005, the World Bank sponsored what became an 8-year-long feasibility study of the Red Dead Canal concept. Almost a year ago to the day, various media outlets reported that construction firms involved in the feasibility study had declared that the project was technically feasible, though it would come with a steep price tag costing at least $10 billion and take years to construct. The Kingdom of Jordan has vigorously pursued the Red Dead Canal concept. Jordan is one of the most water-deprived countries in the world and is constantly searching for new water resources. The civil war in neighboring Syria is exacerbating Jordan's water crisis, as over 500,000 Syrian refugees have fled to Jordan, increasing the population by 9% within just 2 years. In August 2013, the Jordanian government announced its intent to construct a scaled-down version of the canal entirely on Jordanian territory. In terms of scale and cost, what the Jordanians have announced and agreed on with Israel and the Palestinian Authority is far less ambitious than the initial Red Dead concept. Estimates suggest that construction of a desalination plant and pipeline under the new MOU may cost between $450 million to $1 billion. However, it is unclear who will pay for the new project. In essence, under the new MOU, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority have agreed to a water swap. Half of the water pumped from the Red Sea will be desalinated in a plant to be constructed in Aqaba, Jordan. Some of this water will then be used in southern Jordan. The rest will be sold to Israel for use in the Negev desert. In return, Israel will sell fresh water from the Sea of Galilee to northern Jordan and sell the Palestinian Authority discounted fresh water produced by existing Israeli desalination plants. The other half of the water, or the leftover brine, pumped from the Red Sea will be channeled to the Dead Sea, where its environmental impact will be monitored by an international consortium of scientists. So what are the implications for U.S. policy and issues for Congress? With the Obama administration and Secretary of State John Kerry engrossed in seeking an Israeli-Palestinian final status agreement, the timing of the MOU could complement overall U.S. peace brokering efforts, though the agreement was between the parties themselves, with reportedly minimal U.S. involvement. According to Silvan Shalom, Israel's water and energy minister, quote, "This is a historic agreement that realizes a dream of many years. The agreement is of the highest diplomatic, economic, environmental, and strategic importance," unquote. For Jordan, the MOU could be considered a major diplomatic achievement. Though the current plan is a scaled-down version of the original concept, the kingdom will receive additional freshwater resources at a time of heightened scarcity owing to the Syrian civil war. Nevertheless, as the title of this hearing suggests, security and political challenges remain. Arab cooperative infrastructure projects with Israel could be possible targets for extremist violence, as has been the case in Egypt, where gas pipelines traversing the Sinai Peninsula to Israel and Jordan have been repeatedly sabotaged by terrorists. In the water-scarce Middle East region, water-sharing agreements in the absence of a comprehensive Israeli-Palestinian peace may be considered risky, but there are also risks associated with doing nothing. If living conditions in Jordan deteriorated further, one could argue that the stability of a dependable Arab partner for the United States and reliable peace partner for Israel would be jeopardized. It is possible that Congress could be asked to consider appropriating funds to support the implementation of the Red Dead Canal. Lawmakers could pose the following questions, among others. To what extent will the project address water needs in Jordan, Israel, and the West Bank? What are the security risks and costs? Is the cost of the project on target? How will scientists monitor the environmental impact? And is the project scalable beyond the initial construction? Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Ms. Moynihan.
Thank you so much. I have prepared a PowerPoint. First of all, I want to thank Congressman Rohrabacher for your kind remarks about my late father, Senator Moynihan, and the distinguished panel. It means a lot. And he was, of course, a great supporter of the rights of the Tibetan people, and he took me to Communist China in 1975 during the Cultural Revolution when Mao was alive, after we'd lived to India. So I gained a unique perspective on the nature of the Chinese state. And I've always believed if you really want to understand the nature of Communist China, study Tibet. And so I will proceed with the PowerPoint. Where's the gentleman? Oh, okay, next. This is a NASA astronaut photograph of Tibet. One great success of Chinese propaganda is to persuade the world that Tibet is insignificant, that it's a lot smaller than it is, but it wasn't until the 20th century, the era of armed warfare, the airplane and the tank, that Tibet could be conquered. Even Genghis Khan failed. So here's another NASA satellite photograph of the Tibetan Plateau, which is considered the third pole. It's the third largest ice mass concentration on planet Earth after the North and the South Pole. And in Asian folklore, it is known as the Western Treasure House because it's also one of the world's largest supplies of minerals. And next slide. This is a 1920s British map of independent Tibet. And as you can see in the insert, just how large the Tibetan Plateau is. Tibetan Plateau is a unique geomorphic entity with 46,000 glaciers comprising the world's third largest ice mass. But what is significant about this in the age of water scarcity is that it is the source of the great rivers of Asia. The Yangtze, the Yellow, the Indus, the Ganges, the Brahmaputra, the Chenab, the Sutlej, the Salween, and the Mekong, which flow through 11 nations nourishing 3 billion people from Peshawar to Beijing, they all rise in Tibet. And the preservation and the management of Tibet's glaciers and the rivers they sustain is one of the greatest challenges facing humanity in the 21st century. Because Asia is the most populous nation and industrial development and population growth is projected to double within the next 50 years. The combined effects of rapid development, desertification, and water scarcity has already created cycles of droughts and flood, food shortages, and pandemics. But what is China doing about this? Shrinking glaciers, depleting aquifers. I'm going to skip over some of this in interest of time, but it will be available. Asia is now facing a very serious Asian water crisis. Let's move to Today, all of Asia's rivers, except one, the Ganges, are controlled at their sources by the Chinese Communist Party. There are very few international agreements that exist for sharing data and coordinating usage of these rivers as developing nations manage water supplies. As an economic commodity in the age of scarcity, water rights and laws must be appraised. However, China has refused to engage into any negotiations with the downstream riparian nations on the use of Tibet's waters. Here is a map which shows where the major rivers come from. There's 4 that come from eastern Tibet and 4 that come from western Tibet from Mount Kailash. Again, the Ganges originates just a few kilometers outside of control of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, most maps will only show Utsang province, which is next, which is in yellow, as being Tibet. But in the 1950s and into the early 1960s, the Chinese partitioned Tibet as it moved from east to west. Amdo province, Kham province have all been partitioned into Qinghai, into Gansei, into all these other provinces, but this is historical Tibet, so you can see how large it is. It comprises almost 1/3 of Communist China's landmass. As you can see, this is another important map which shows China's grip on Asia, and the occupation of Tibet gives China an enormous strategic and resource advantage. This is a map I got next from a Japanese website, which, next slide, which shows the major ethnic reasons. And of course, China learned a lesson from the collapse of the Soviet Union, which my father predicted would happen through the forces of ethnicity. China is, in fact, a multi-ethnic state. The 1 star of the Han and then the 4 stars of the other groups declares that it is a multi-ethnic state. And as you can see in yellow, that is East Turkestan, the Uyghur people, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, and Manchuria. So there is potential for ethnic conflict also, again, over exploitation of resources. There are the 3 main phases of the Chinese Communist occupation of Tibet. Phase 1, 1960s, military invasion. And that is when the deforestation, especially of eastern Tibet, began. Millions upon millions of acres of first-growth forest were destroyed at this time, which had for many centuries functioned also as a barrier to prevent flooding into Southeast Asia and Southwest China. Phase 2, the death of Mao, the rise of Deng. And these are all details you can go into later when you have more time. Now we're into Phase 3, which is mines, dams, and war games. In Phase 2, a lot of military roads were built across Tibet. I've traveled over Tibet several times. It is, as has my friend and colleague Paul Berkowitz, it is very, very, very remote, and you can see that there is no one to stop the Chinese. There will be no NATO, there will be no NATO troops, there will be no UN peacekeeping forces. They control the roof of the world. And now, because of the population transfer of Han Chinese onto the Tibetan Plateau and the military infrastructure that they installed, they have been able to now, in Phase 3, build thousands upon thousands of hydroelectric dams and mines and military airstrips and military garrisons. In 2000, China launched a vast development project called Chibu Daifa, opening and development of the western regions of Xinjiang and Tibet, which together comprise half of Communist China's landmass. And to date, at least 131 people inside Tibet have self-immolated to protest Chinese Communist assaults on their land and culture. Could we move to the next? Yeah. Some images managed to reach the internet, but Time magazine described the self-immolations in Tibet as the most underreported story of 2013. Next phase, here's a farmer that has self-immolated. What is one of the sources of this conflict? It is not just assaults on Tibetan culture and the Buddhist faith, it is the desecration of Tibet's ancestral lands. We go to the next. Here is a hydro dam on the Sengay Khyabab, which means mouth of the lion. Before, these were Chinese rivers, Indian rivers, they were Tibetan rivers. And there's an enormous body of folklore and mythology associated with all these rivers. Sengay Khyabab means mouth of the lion. This is the Indus, which flows through India and Pakistan. This is one of the many, many. This is one of the most serious sources of conflict between Communist China and Democratic India, which is diverting the Yarlung Sangpo, with its Tibetan name, which is the Brahmaputra, in the North-South Water Transfer Program. The Chinese are building a tunnel to divert the waters of the Brahmaputra to northern China, which has been suffering from extreme drought conditions for many, many years. And it is through an earthquake-prone zone. There are many complications. Chinese scientists have also said they have many objections.
Could you please repeat where you said the water is being diverted from where to where?
From the bend in the Brahmaputra, well, as it flows down into northern India and into Bangladesh. That is where they're building this very, very, very long tunnel project. The Chinese are building tunnels so fast, mostly with Canadian engineers. And I can go next. Here is some more of the dams. We can go into that more in detail. Here's a dam on the Mekong. There are over 7 hydroelectric dams on the Mekong, which is the main source of fresh water for all of Southeast Asia.
Is that actually affecting the amount of water that flows into Southeast Asia then?
Absolutely. Water flows on the Mekong are said to be down 40 to 50%, and fish stocks have also declined dramatically. And I met with several Thai senators who were flown by the Chinese government to northern Tibet to look at the dam projects, of which they're very proud, and the Thai senators.
And that water is now being used in China?
Pardon?
The water then, rather than flowing, those of us who've seen the Mekong, it's a very wide river. Now you say the water's being diverted from there to, and it's staying in China then?
Yes, it's being used to create reservoirs that mostly service southern Tibet and southwestern China, and to create hydroelectric. And in the interest of time, we will continue. Here's another power station on the Brahmaputra. Could we go to the, oh, we've skipped ahead, that's okay. This is a very important map created by my friend Michael Buckley, whose website, Meltdown in Tibet, I encourage everybody to visit. This shows some of the hydro dams on the Drichu, the Zachu, and the Gyalbo-Nuchu, which are the Mekong, the Salween, and the Yangtze. Just look how many hydroelectric dams. There are dams that are 10 to 15 feet high, and the tallest dam in the world is on the Mekong. The widest dam is the Three Gorges on the Yangtze. But you can see this is creating a looming environmental crisis in all of South and Southeast Asia. Next slide. China has over 300,000 dams. It is the world's #1 dam builder. You can see most of the concentration of dams are in Tibet, the 4 rivers of eastern Tibet. Tibet is, again, was always called in Asian folklore the Western Treasure House because of the mineral, oil, gas, and salt deposits. Again, you can study these maps in detail. Another important issue is the decline of permafrost in Tibet, which will release methane gas, and the shrinking glaciers are also of tremendous concern. Could we go to the next? There's the map of the melting permafrost. And next slide. This is a glacial lake created near the Rohrabacher Glacier on the northern side of Mount Everest in Chinese-occupied Tibet. In the last 90 years, the glacier's tail has lost 90 vertical meters in depth. We go to the next slide. This was an exhibit at the Asian Society called Rivers of Ice by the famous American mountaineer David Brashear. You can see since the 1930s, when the top photograph was taken, how much ice mass has been lost on the north face of Everest. Here are some more images. I encourage you to go to the Asia Society website. You can see more. Now, why is this one of the most underreported stories in the world? China spends so much time attacking the Dalai Lama, the distinguished Nobel Peace Prize laureate who's lived for almost 55 years in exile in India. What has this done? It confuses diplomats and journalists, but it subverts all discussion of the exploitation of Tibet's resources. My dad always said the Chinese have a perverse obsession with the Dalai Lama, but it works because it diverts everyone's attention to this strange obsession they have, and we are not talking about what is going on in Tibet. Go to next slide, please, because Tibet is a war zone. In 2012, Chinese Defense Minister Lang Guilong said, "In the coming 5 years, our military will push forward with preparations for military conflict in every strategic direction. We may be living in peaceful times, but we can never forget war, never send the horses south, or put the bayonets and guns away." So the Chinese are about to engage in any negotiations, which you say are possible in the Middle East, another conflict zone, about the use of Tibet's waters. Here's a map next of China's military investment and expansion. It is Tibet also is a strategic launching pad for drones. The Chinese have stolen drone technology from American firms, and an American State Department official went to an air show in southern China and was alarmed to see all these drones. And they have installed many of these drones in 6 new military airforts they have built in southern Tibet. They can reach India, they can reach New Delhi in 20 minutes. The Chinese Communist Party, however, is facing a crisis of legitimacy at home and abroad. My colleague Gordon Chang can speak to this. The next slide.
And we
This is
should
the man China
probably
fears
move
most,
on to
the
Mr.
Dalai
Chang's
Lama.
testimony.
And this is my last slide. What is the price of appeasement? For 6 decades, the People's Republic of China has raped and pillaged Tibet without impediment or penalty, but the world will pay a high price for ignoring the Chinese communist occupation of Tibet. Genghis Khan is said to have uttered the famous phrase, "He who controls Tibet controls the world." Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chang.
Chairman Rohrabacher, Ranking Member Keating, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear before you today. My testimony will focus on how, in a very unexpected way, China's water problems are affecting the United States. The People's Republic of China, over the course of decades, has mismanaged and misused its lakes, rivers, and streams. And the resulting freshwater crisis has, in the words of senior Beijing leaders, created doubt about the future of the Chinese state. As a former Chinese water minister has recently said, quote, "To fight for every drop of water or die, that is the challenge for China." Now, Beijing officials, unfortunately, have been fighting their neighbors over water. As Chairman Rohrabacher noted in his opening statement, China is the source of river water for more countries than any other nation, controlling the headwaters needed by almost half of the world's population. People's Republic of China has 14 land neighbors, 13 of them co-riparians, and as Ranking Member Keating has noted, there are hundreds of water-sharing agreements in the world. China, however, is not a party to any of them, even refusing to begin negotiations. The Chinese have commandeered Asia's great rivers by building, on average, 1 large dam a day since 1949. And now Beijing is seeking to harness the river resources of a neighbor, Burma, for its own benefit. Since 2009, China has been building the Myitsone Dam, located at the headwaters of the Irrawaddy River. It will be the first dam on that vital waterway, part of a 7-dam cascade, a $20 billion undertaking. Myitsone has been called China's attempt to export the Three Gorges Dam, and it is more unpopular in Burma than that massive project is in China. The country's former military government negotiated the deal with China without public consultation. So, therefore, those who disliked the junta, and that was the overwhelming majority of people in Burma, disliked the dam. The project has also become a symbol of China's exploitation of Burma. Now, the Burmese junta renamed the country Myanmar. In a power-starved nation, about 90% of the electricity produced by the dam will be exported to southern China. Now, the Burmese believe that Myitsone is unpopular also for other reasons. It will displace tens of thousands of the ethnic Kachin minority. It will flood historical and cultural sites, including what is believed to be the birthplace of Burma. It will destroy one of the world's important biodiversity hotspots. It will rob the river of crucial sediments that therefore threaten the livelihood of downstream rice farmers, and it will sit near a major fault line. It would be hard to design a project that would be more unpopular. So it is no surprise that in September 2011, President Thein Sein suspended work on the dam. So why do we care? Well, within days, Beijing found somebody to blame, and that somebody is the United States. People's Daily, which is the Communist Party's flagship publication, started the attack by suggesting that the United States and other Western countries had pressured the Burmese government to suspend work on the dam. Beijing has in general viewed this anti-China sentiment that was bubbling up in Burma not as something that was indigenous, but was a conspiracy in the West between our governments and certainly between pro-Western NGOs, and we were all doing this, China believes, to undercut Beijing's national interest. Unfortunately, the Chinese have not changed their views since then. Quote, following its opening up, Myanmar has become a main battleground for the world's major powers, and the Myitsone project has become a bargaining chip in the resulting geopolitical struggle. This came from People's Daily on September 2nd of last year. Quote, some analyses point out that Western countries, like the United States and Japan, will first have to ruin this Sino-Myanmar relationship in order to expand their influence in Myanmar, and demonizing the Myitsone project is an opening, unquote. The Chinese have still not figured out that they're operating in a new context in Burma. Instead, they see the U.S. lurking in the shadows, causing it misery. Now, of course, the Myitsone project, despite what People's Daily tries to say, is not an American issue. But what is important for us, though, is that Beijing's first instinct was to blame the United States for its own failings in Burma. That certainly affects us, and it is a warning that as long as the Communist Party rules China, it may not be possible to have good relations with the Chinese people. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Goodtree.
Chairman Rohrabacher, Ranking Member Keating, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today about global water security. Is the mismatch between freshwater supply and rising demand inevitable and eternal? Or can it be brought into better balance, thereby reducing a primary reason for water conflict? While it is often taken as a given that water supply is unchangeable and that per capita demand can only increase, neither is true. Today, I'd like to share with you an example of where both the supply and the demand curves for water have been bent. This new approach successfully changes the paradigm of water relationships, from the historic approach of dividing up scarce resources to a new approach which achieves water independence, fosters ongoing cooperation, and enables mutual economic empowerment. The solution I'm describing is water technology, or water tech. Water tech is biology, chemistry, physics, mechanical engineering, and information technology deployed in novel ways to increase the supply and manage the demand of water. Water tech is a multi-billion-dollar industry in my state of Massachusetts that serves global markets. I'd like to speak about how our industry and countries like Israel use water tech to increase international security. Israel has remarkably changed the supply and demand curves of water for itself and for its neighbors. Recognized as the world's leading water tech innovator, the modern state of Israel was founded in a land of sand and swamp. Famously, Israel made the desert bloom through novel water management and the creation of drip irrigation. Today, Israel exports carrots to Russia because it can do so cheaper and with less resource consumption than Russia can itself. But Israel's rapid economic growth continued to tax its limited natural water sources, while demand from its neighbors for the same water remained a serious source of conflict, as mentioned by the chairman today and my distinguished fellow panelist. Israel made the decision to satisfy all its water needs by changing the rules of supply and demand through the deployment of multiple forms of technology. Today, Israel is the world's #1 recycling country, reclaiming 75% of its water. #2 country, Spain, reclaims 17%. In desalination, 85% of Israel's domestic consumption is supplied by turning Mediterranean seawater into drinking water, and I can tell you it tastes great. Now here's the bonus of this transformation, which accrues to international relations. Just last month, as ably described today, Israel, Jordan, and the Palestinian Authority announced an agreement to exchange freshwater, saltwater, and desalinated water from where it exists or can be built to where it is needed. This Red Sea, Dead Sea Canal improves the lives of Jordanians, Palestinians, and Israelis. There were two key enablers. Going back 30 years and more recently, the will to get it done, and the other enabler, water tech. Notably, it was arranged by the principals primarily themselves, without the glare of international mediators, albeit with important project finance from the World Bank. Water tech has enabled Israel to satisfy its water needs, diminish conflict, and enabled it to form agreements with its neighbors based on opportunity, not just avoiding hardship. Here's a second bonus of Israel's success that goes well beyond its borders. Israeli companies are now bringing their demonstrated expertise around the world, changing the supply-demand balance globally. Using desalination in California, drip irrigation in India and China, smart water network installations on 4 continents, Israeli water technology is increasing availability and quality and reducing demand, while removing the root cause of water conflict. A particular favorite technology of mine is that the water in most bottles of Coca-Cola in Europe is purified by an Israeli-invented treatment, and we know that Coca-Cola is necessary for global peace. In Massachusetts, we bring our state's strength in innovation, our multi-billion-dollar water tech industry, academic research, and dozens of water tech startups to meet the needs of a thirsty world. We believe in Massachusetts that water tech is both good business and a strategically important national export. In the Q&A, I would be happy to identify some non-budgetary means that Congress can consider to enable water technology in service of global security interests. It's been appropriately noted that the American export of social media has enabled open communication among oppressed people and thereby fosters freedom. In a similar vein, I submit today that water technology sustains life by creating clean and abundant supply, while enabling economic opportunity and diffusing one of the most enduring sources of human conflict. Distinguished members, let's bend the water curve of supply and demand in the interest of peace and prosperity. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all the witnesses today. This has been very thought-provoking testimony, and it is the chair's intent to have 3-minute questioning of our witnesses, and then we'll have a second round because votes are scheduled within about 15 minutes. Ms. Moynihan, could you tell us what impact does China's occupation of Tibet and thus the control of this water, how does that impact on India and the India-China conflict?
Well, the North-South Water Diversion Program that you had questioned when you saw the slide would be an absolute catastrophe for the people of India and Bangladesh because the Brahmaputra is one of the main sources of fresh water for eastern India and for all of Bangladesh. And the Chinese, as Gordon also noted, refused to engage into any negotiations. They refused to sign any treaties for water sharing. India and Pakistan have for many years had a treaty on sharing of the Indus River, but China won't engage. And they continue to demonize the Dalai Lama, and they've made, I forgot to mention, over 200 military incursions into India in 2013 from Tibet.
And just for Mr. Goodtree, just to note that in Orange County, California, we have one of the most sophisticated, technologically sophisticated water companies in our, say, water commitments, because it's public and private, but we reclaim our water and use it 9 times before it actually goes into the ocean. That type of reclamation, is any of that going on in Jordan or any of these other places that we've been talking about?
There is water reclamation certainly going on throughout the world. It requires an investment, but to your point, it is reused over and over and over again. So in essence, it's called new water. Singapore is a particular excellent case that has used reclamation as one of its 4 taps or sources of water to reduce its dependence and separate itself from Malaysia in terms of conflict. So yes, reclamation is growing significantly, for example, in Spain, Singapore, and places throughout the world, including Southern California.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Keating.
You've covered so much ground. I just want to hit on a couple of points, and I'll just ask all the questions at once. But Mr. Guthrie, you mentioned that the U.S. can be of assistance in non-budgetary ways. I'm curious about that. And also to our panelists, I am concerned too. 2 of the panelists referenced natural disasters, earthquakes. Can you comment on what some of those, the results of those would be? So if I could just quickly have the answers to those questions.
Thank you, Chairman, Congressman Keating. The U.S. is a tough market for new water technology to succeed at home. And as a result, we lag behind other nations in attracting water technology entrepreneurs and exporting water technology to help ameliorate water security crises. Briefly, here are 4 methods that can enhance our ability to use water technology as a tool to advance U.S. foreign policy interests. First, the overall U.S. partnership with Israel around R&D is an enormous benefit to our economy in life sciences, information technology, and social media, but not yet in water. H.R. 3683, the U.S.-Israel Energy Cooperation Enhancement Act, expands the existing collaboration in energy R&D to include water. The more we can leverage cooperative advances with Israel in water tech to correct supply-demand imbalances around the globe, the more we can diffuse global conflict. The bill was approved last month by voice vote in the House Energy and Commerce Committee and awaits a floor vote. Second, the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, SRF, administered by the EPA, has been enormously successful helping states to build and maintain water infrastructure. But the loan terms to discourage the use of new technology because penalties are assessed for approaches that fail. Without risking the water supply, terms can be made less onerous so that states will be more likely to choose new approaches that have better results versus sticking with inefficient methods. Once proven in the U.S., water tech has a better chance of succeeding abroad in water conflict hotspots. Third, EPA review of new technology is necessary to protect public health and the environment, but often the agency is unable to approve new technology because it does not have processes to evaluate them. As a result, the U.S. is often seen as a less desirable place to invent or deploy water tech. To rectify the situation, EPA evaluative mechanisms can be streamlined to keep up with advances that meet our needs at home while being promoted abroad. Fourth and finally, the Export-Import Bank is an essential credit source for exporting American goods, but water tech is not identified as one of its 8 key industries. And the key countries it targets do not correspond closely to where water conflict occurs. Congress can engage the bank to align its programs with U.S. foreign policy interests regarding water security.
Ranking Member Keating, the Myeongdong Dam is just upstream from the largest city in Kachin State. And there have been various estimates about the number of people who would be inundated and killed in a dam burst, somewhere 100,000. I don't know if the numbers are reliable, but we do know that, for instance, the 2008 earthquake in Sichuan province was undoubtedly caused by the water in a reservoir very close to the fault line. And that was absolutely devastating. So people expect the same thing in Burma if the dam is allowed to proceed.
And we from the testimony we have just had, we see that China has obviously been perhaps reckless in their location of these dams, much less reckless in terms of the international peace, but also for the safety of the people who live near the dams. Mr. Marino?
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Chang, whereas I'm not an expert on China, I've studied China most of my life, been to China. China is a very wealthy country. It's wrapped its arms around capitalism. It loves it. Still a dictatorship, a brutal country, constantly violates human rights, has no concern for the environment, has possesses or owns 1/2 of the U.S. outside debt, spending money all over the world, investments you may call them, building its military at an unbelievable rate, and buying gold up by the boatloads. Now, given all that, and it's 1.3 going on 1.4 billion people, the Communist Party is still very strong, and I think that in my lifetime I will not see that change. What do we do? What does the United States and its allies do to at least curtail the activities of China on a wide variety of bases?
That's a very important question. It goes to the core of American foreign policy, because right now the United States almost doesn't have a China policy. We're reacting to the belligerence that we've seen in Beijing over the last 2.5 years, especially the last 3 or 4 months. But essentially what I think goes to the core of what we should be doing is to reassess our policy and approach to China, because for more than 4 decades we've tried to engage the Chinese and bring them into the international system.
But can we do that alone? I think not. And given the fact that the trade that goes on around the world, the United States is one of the biggest importers of Chinese products, I'm at a loss at this point, other than total non-trade with China, to have any impact whatsoever. And I don't see that in the future from the U.S.'s perspective. So what do we get down to? Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Let's get down to the basics as to how do we approach this with China.
Well, I think that we need to reassess and understand that our fundamental policies just have not been working. On a broad array of issues, there are specific things we should be doing, and I would be more than pleased to work with your staff on what I think needs to be done. But certainly, we need to reassess things, because China is moving in directions that are extremely troubling and have not been predicted by the architects of America's China policies.
You know, they're like the bully on the elementary playground. They're twice as big as everyone else. They really do not care, and there's no one who can, at this point, step up to them and set them back.
We can do that if we have the will.
And Mr. Blumenauer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I appreciate your courtesy. I'm wondering, just taking a page out of the conclusion of the Chairman's opening remarks, and Mr. Marino's appropriate concern about China and what you all have said, if there would be an opportunity for the United States to focus on water technology and international agreements in South Asia, that whether it's what we do with the World Bank, it's what we do in terms of initiatives through the United Nations, through bilateral and multilateral efforts, that we try and focus more aggressively on water solutions, that we could work, again, globally on the panoply of threats, not just with climate change, but seismic events we've seen throughout the region. Is there a way that we could just sort of zero in a cooperative way with the partners? If, as I think Ms. Moynihan pointed out, if India and Pakistan, for heaven's sakes, can have an agreement on the Indus River, is this an area that we could deal with the Mekong, that we could promote more cooperation and thoughtfulness and let the force of the ideas and about 2 billion people outside China who depend on this resource to be able to build some momentum? I welcome comments from any of you in this regard.
The problem is the Chinese have refused to discuss Tibet.
I want to be clear. I'm not talking about China at this point. I'm talking about moving with India, with Pakistan, with Thailand, with Vietnam, to try and develop both refine the factual elements that you talked about in terms of threats and opportunities, and build some momentum and some understanding in the region and the world stage.
I think the one thing that we can do is certainly work with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, because ASEAN has been trying to find issues upon which it can cooperate. And this is one issue that affects most of them. Of course, the big country outside of ASEAN that is affected by these water sharing issues is India. But it'd be very easy for ASEAN to form a partnership with India and the United States, just as ASEAN has formed what's called ASEAN +3, which is ASEAN, China, Japan, and South Korea. So there is precedent for ASEAN to do this. It is the organization that I think is in place and is perhaps the most willing to take up issues of this sort.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
We will continue probably until the vote is called, which should be within the next 15 minutes. So we will proceed with a second round of questions. And first of all, let's note, we've noted here that India and Pakistan have been able to reach an agreement. Thank you. India, Pakistan has reached agreement. The Palestinians, the Jordanians, and the Israelis. If we can have countries with that deep a difference and that long-term conflict that has existed between these peoples reach agreement, that is a comment. That itself is a comment on the challenge we face with China, who's been unwilling to reach any agreements with any of these countries that we're talking about. That is a comment on, I believe, the government and the attitude of the ruling clique that runs Beijing. About technology, well, first of all, let me ask Mr. Sharp, how much water, actually fresh water, will be provided by the Dead Sea to Red Sea project in proportion? Is it 10% of the water needs for Jordan or in Israel? What are we talking about here?
Mr. Chairman, all of the information that I've been able to glean about this project has been from open sources. The actual agreement has not been publicly released just yet. In essence, Jordan will be desalinating about 80 million cubic meters, using 30 of it in its own country and sending 50 to Israel.
Well, what is that in reference to the entire water consumption of Jordan?
I don't know. I'd have to get back to you.
We're talking about 5% or 1% or 10%?
I don't think it's insignificant, but I don't think it's an
You
overnight.
can get back to me on that.
Sure.
That's, I think it'd be important for us to know that if it's a significant amount. And Mr. Goodtree, in terms of technology development and the availability of water, the Lockheed, I believe it was, corporation has announced several months ago of a breakthrough of water desalination technology. It's a new type of material that can serve as part of the membrane, I guess, is a water desalination process. Have you looked at that at all, and what impact do you think that would have on some of these issues?
There is enormous development going on in membrane technology, which enables higher throughput when the water goes through to be filter out impurities. There's a number of multi-billion-dollar companies in my state. Lockheed's not one of them, so I'm not familiar with its research. In particular, one of the most exciting new technologies, there are a few of them. One is called forward osmosis, which is a different form of desalination, which is being created in my state by a company called Oasis Water, and also nanomaterial membranes. A lot of great research and some commercialization out of MIT is making a huge difference. I'd like to just think, if I can comment on Mr. Blumenauer's last question, which was the idea about neighbors around China. It's not about the agreement with the Chinese, or let's say whatever country is holding on to or hoarding that resource, but it's establishing water independence through establishment of new sources of water through technology, new water, which is whether desalination or recyclination or lowering demand through technology again, such as drip irrigation. So it's about establishing, we think of oil independence, this is water independence through independent sources, and basically break that link between the hoarding country and the needy country.
Yeah, if you can, obviously, producing more wealth is something that is, at least from the chair's perspective, better than the idea of trying to distribute a lack of wealth.
Exactly.
And let me just note, I'm the vice chairman of the Science Committee, and I have water is one of my top priorities in terms of my own personal priorities, as you can see in this hearing.
Yes.
But let me just, Mr. Keating, you may proceed.
Well, we're up against a roll call, but I wanted to just give you a chance to comment on one aspect that has been touched upon, but it's very important behind this. And that's the fact that a lot of these dams that were there, they're also sources of energy, the hydropower. And with the difference in technology available in our production and use of energy, could this have an effect, too, in terms of independence of these other countries? Because it's just not the water purity, the scarcity. It's also as a source of power that this creates problems and instability in other countries. If you'd just like to comment on that aspect, the energy aspect of this.
Well, of course, the hydro dams do produce reservoirs and energy, and in Chinese-occupied Tibet, most of that is going to industrial development. And there's one issue I've wanted to mention is that China is also rapidly building mines at the source of a lot of the rivers, so they are creating long-term pollution that will go downstream to the other riparian nations. And that could be a whole nother hearing.
But that's very relevant. I mean, that is extremely relevant to the discussion of water in terms of countries that are permitting that type of pollution, which then again eliminates that as a source for their neighbors. And thank you for bringing that up. I think it's important. Mr. Moreno?
Mr. Chang, and anyone else who wants to enlighten me on this, let's say, for example, we're able to convince India and Pakistan and Vietnam and Laos and Burma to coalesce and understand the fact that we have to have some effect on China in order to resolve this water issue. What would we do collectively? Would we say we're not going to trade with you anymore, which I don't think is going to be too devastating to China? If you could name one or two facts or entities as to what specifically we could do with China?
I think that if you had all of the countries in the region, including India and the United States, have a unified stand, maybe China would listen, but I really doubt it. Yeah. Because what we have seen so far on a number of issues, some critical to the national security of the United States, that we have not been able to move the Chinese in better directions. If we can't do it on those issues, it's very unlikely that countries in the region can do this with respect to China. Right now, you have a Chinese political system in distress. You have a lot of intense infighting at the top. And I'm not so sure that Beijing can maintain good relations with other countries, including the United States. So at this point, I think that basically we have to just sit by and watch. Got to remember that the Indus agreement between India and Pakistan was because India made a decision that it wanted peace. China has yet to make that decision. Sure. And until it does so, there's all sorts of things we can try, but I'm sure that they will be ineffective.
You know, with my visits there and conversations with leaders and people in the government, they're not going to, those in control are not going to relinquish control. I mean, it would take a massive civil war within China to make that change, if it could be made, which I think it cannot. So my position is that if and until communism is defeated in China, there is no answer to the solution.
I agree.
I agree.
Just a note for my friend that those of us who spent a considerable part of our life fighting communism, I don't know any of us who predicted that the communist regime in Moscow would crumble either. I mean, nobody thought that would happen. And
Senator Moynihan predicted it in 1979. Left a long paper trail.
well said. That, and he was making it happen too. And but it was something that many of us, I should say, if not most of us, would never have predicted. And when President Reagan launched what I consider to be the strategy that won that victory in the Cold War, which was helping those people who were struggling for freedom rather than just depending on American military might to deter the leaders of the Soviet Union. We actually began supporting in a big way the Lech Wałęsas of the world, but also the Mujahideen, also the Contras in Latin America, which drained all of the willpower as well as the resources from Moscow. And I would suggest that perhaps a strategy of helping those people in China who are struggling for democracy may well be the best strategy, and that we should put that same kind of emphasis that Reagan put on it for breaking down the Soviet Union.
The Chairman yield for a second?
I certainly would.
I would like to see that happen too, but we're talking about two different ideologies between the then Soviet Union and China. The numbers of people, the numbers of uneducated people, the resources available, and the access to outside information to the Chinese people, which really doesn't exist at this point. So, and given the fact that you had the right people at the right time, you had Reagan, you had several leaders in Russia, at least leaning in that direction. I see no indication of the hierarchy or the military leaders of the government leaning in any direction other than to take more control over natural resources, minerals, oil, gas, you name it, and land is their primary goal. I yield back. Thank you.
We'll have a long talk about that sometime. I'm actually more optimistic because of my experience with Russia, and again, my just total surprise that we were able to achieve that goal in that shorter period of time when President Reagan put that strategy down. Let me just close here with a very, first of all, Mr. Keating, would you like a closing statement?
Fine.
All right, and Mr. Marino, would you like a short closing statement? And let me thank the witnesses today. We have heard a great deal of information coming at this issue from different perspectives. And Mr. Goodtree, I certainly appreciated you added a whole new flavor to this, and we appreciate Mr. Keating inviting you, and of course, Mr. Sharp, your detailing of the Dead Sea to Red Sea project is invaluable. This subcommittee will be going very shortly on a trip to Israel, and that information will be invaluable to us. And as far as Ms. Moynihan and Mr. Chang, you have detailed for us and provided us information that I hope that every member of Congress could hear, because it really does exemplify the horrific challenge that we face with this regime in Beijing that is bullying its neighbors, running roughshod over earthly concerns like how much water there's going to be, and even to the point that they're, as you point out, Ms. Moynihan, they're not only consuming the water and preventing their neighbors from having this. It's sort of an act of aggression, but they're also polluting the water without remorse. And these are things that we need to focus on, and we need to deal with them in a tough way so we can make some progress in this area. But the most important thing, the world will be a better place when we have water and energy that will uplift all of mankind. And these challenges with China and elsewhere, we need to make sure that we are increasing the supply of water for humankind and the availability of clean water to people so they can live healthy lives, and that so many resources are not sucked out of a system to take care of the health of people whose health is being dragged down by improper water and by water that's not well. I appreciate all of your insights today, and this hearing is now adjourned. Is the vote on now?